Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles. I'm the host of the Sencast, but I'm also the managing director of B Squared. If you are a new listener, then welcome to the Sencast. In this episode of the Sencast, we discuss SEND in later education years. So we're looking at preparing for adulthood and that further education. And we're discussing the facts, the law, and the real stories. And my guest this week is Chris Lefcovitch, as head of additional learning support at Milton Keynes College. And Chris is an experienced head of additional learning support with a diverse background spanning from frontline teaching, youth justice, PRU tutoring, and senior leadership. Chris is motivated to build inclusive systems that empower young people with SEND to thrive. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. I talk about our assessment software a lot, but we have our Eversense. This is our evidence for learning and parental engagement platform. And it feels like social media, so it's easy to understand, it's easy to use, but it's extremely secure. It's a safe place to share evidence of learning with parents or external professionals. It's a great way to capture pupil voice, uses your homeschool diary, and so much more. Visit the B Square website to find out more about Eversense or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take through Eversense and what it can do for you. Now, let's get on with that podcast. My guest this week is Chris Lefcovitch, the head of additional learning support at Milton Keynes College. Chris is an experienced head of additional learning support with a diverse background spanning frontline teaching, youth justice, PRU tutoring, and senior leadership. Chris is motivated to build inclusive systems that empower young people with SEND to thrive. And as well as his role at Milton Keynes College, Chris also writes articles for magazines, talks at conferences around SEND legislation and guidance, and improving outcomes for children and young people with SEND. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Cheers, Dale, mate. Thank you.
Several weeks ago, we had a meeting to discuss the topic, and due to an impromptu fire alarm causing the fire brigade to arrive, and unable to get it back into the office for another hour, we had the meeting, but I spent the entire time walking around a car park on my phone. But it was a great conversation. I think it lasted about an hour. And the topic we discussed has come up a few times since then in other conversations with other people. And the topic we discussed is the bad news about when EHCPs realistically end. And I think lots of people believe that they are golden tickets that will look after and protect their child until they're 25. And that's not always the case, is it, Chris?
No. In short, without having brevity, Dale, because obviously this is a podcast, the reality is that around the same time, and we're talking now nearly 12 years ago for those pathfinders, legislation came out to support the SEND Code of Practice that, and bear in mind the SEND Code of Practice is guidance, apart from where it says must, but it's called the 19 to 25 EHCP entitlement. And what it says is that the government expects most students to have completed their up to level 3 and including level 3 education by the age of 19. And that would generally give them 3 years in post-16 education. However, local authorities can't blanket cease plans just because someone is 19. And that it might take people a bit longer to get to their objective outcomes. I have been around EHCPs since the Pathfinder stages. I worked for a neighbouring LA to one of the Pathfinders. That one was Hertfordshire. And in over 11 years, I know of 2 students that have been 25. And that's in excess of, well, I would say definitely over 3,500 reviews I've been party to and chaired to. That's minute. Okay. And both of those cases were students that had incredible learning journeys. They would have come in at a life learning department level and incrementally, slowly but surely, had worked their way up to almost like completing further education, a bit like gaming, but they would have completed a level 3 year 2. So we would have had them because they were forever showing progress. I think it's important that what the LAs, and I say this having worked for an LA, what the LAs are generally looking for when it comes to review at that post 16 and above is a young person engaging? Are they benefiting? That's the holistic piece. And are they progressing? And that can be academia, but obviously case studies suggest it can be the whole child's progression that supports the maintenance of an EHCP. That's the important piece. Obviously, then, if a student decides, you know what, I don't really like college, or I don't like the AP and I'm 18, I think I'll get a job, your plan's going to cease because you're not in the E to keep the EHCP. Importantly, for students, if you enter a level 4 course, a level 4 or above, and that would be deemed higher education, there's a different support structure. So it's a bit like, Dale, if I took out a loan for 50 grand and thought, oh, this is amazing, I've only got to pay £1 back a month. My kids are paying that back. There are T's and C's. Obviously, in 2014, it was the whole premise and the shining neon lights were, oh, you're 25, isn't that amazing? That 0 to 25 piece. The T's and C's are minute and often not articulated. And until you have to lead, send and provision at a stage where I often crassly say sometimes I'm at the sharp end of the sword, because then Senkos at key stage 3 and 4 don't generally tell parents, or be careful, because I'll get parents come in and say, oh, they've got this till they're 25, but they're in level 3 year 2. You've hit the ceiling of what further education can be. And then coherently, you should be moving into maybe a foundation degree or something like that for that coherent progressive development. So there's lots of T's and C's, and generally we see students 19, 20. We've got, at the minute, I've got about a couple 22-year-olds, but they're at the end of their education journey. And that's not us forcing it, that it organically, be that they are completing the outcomes in their plan, or they are at the level where they now need to progress into HE or employment, or you think about supported internships. It's very far from 100%, right, you're going to have this till you're 25, but very far from. And that's kind of cloaked within legislation and not really put out there.
I bet it is a case of you have parents who get the EHCPs and they're just going along, right, we're doing secondary, and then they kind of get the support and they can do their A levels and they move on. But yeah, once you've done A levels, you're making that next step. It's the EHCPs ending.
Yeah, and parents aren't aware of that. Something that does align, but is slightly different now, is, and I don't know whether you plan to come on to this, but the Code of Practice talks about the responsibility to support next steps. And that can be at any phase transfer year, okay? But in 11 years since I've been working from secondary and above, every year I've had a parent discuss, say, guided learning hours in FE and say, oh, so that means they won't be in 5 days a week. I'm like, no, they won't be. That isn't often shared with parents. And for parents of learners that might be working towards, say, preparing for adulthood outcomes, might be working at entry level or level 1, often that really impacts life circumstance, because they're like, oh, I'm working. What happens then? And then you're looking at the children with disabilities team or the adults with disabilities and day centres and the old direct payment carers engaging with that learner. But again, that's something that every year, and look, we're nearly 12 years deep with plans being in place, is still something every year I have to clarify with parents, which is a shame because you would think the knowledge and the responsibility for information, advice and guidance is there with the LAs. And obviously I spoke about the responsibility to support transition being with the current setting, but there's lots of things that might get missed in the ether, Dale, that when a parent comes, I'm almost like
You've got a lot of education to give.
breaking hearts, but it is to a certain extent being the bearer of bad news. And it says, well, don't shoot the messenger, which is a shame. It's a shame because the system should run until they're finished within FE.
But you talk there about, in a lot of colleges, it's not a full-time timetable.
Of course.
So it might not be there 5 days. They might only have 1 or 2 lessons in a day.
Correct.
But if the school transport, if that is there, arrives at 9 and leaves at 3, and they have 1 lesson from 11 till 1:30 or so, or whatever it is, they need to be on the school transport in the morning. They need to be there till the end of the day.
Yep.
If they're going to be on it, they're not going to go, okay, we'll do a transport to get you in for 11. But again, that whole understanding and just assumptions of it will be how it was, that's, again, you've got to break that kind of pill.
The PTU thing is that those passenger transport units, that acronym, that's a difficult one because we all know they can be fairly tricky, but that is a massive one because timetables aren't, you got 6 or 5 lessons per day. You might have 1 in the morning and then 1 at lunchtime. You've got a gap there. Or like you say, you might have 2 back to back in the morning and then you're stuck and passenger transport aren't coming out at 11:30. They'll be like, oh, you're on the minibus with the students that finish at 5. And whilst there is a safeguarding responsibility of a setting, I don't want this to sound crass, we're not babysitters. So, and there's that deprivation of liberties and that mental capacity act thing that comes in at 16. That'll be worth talking about as well. We can't stop someone from going to the local chicken shop. We can't, if they want a chicken wrap or a chicken burger or something like that, unless there's a deprivation of liberties in. So they might just do that, and we can't control what goes on out in the community. It's very different, and there are times historically over the last 11 years where I've probably been on the brunt of having to address the differences with misguided, let's say, and I don't mean any malice to that. I would have chosen a stronger word, but parents that maybe, and parent carers that maybe uncle aunties that haven't really had a wealth of information around what post 16 looks like. And I say post 16, and that'll include APs.
Yeah.
That'll include, because they're not 5 days a week.
No. But it is that sort of thing, is it kind of, everyone knows colleges are part-time. Cool. What's the implication in this situation? Again, is the moment you kind of put your child, or the child gets on that transport in the morning, and when they get off it in the evening, that kind of child is the responsibility of the local authority. They've assigned the transport, they will be in school. If they walk out of school, that's the school's responsibility. They've got to deal with it. It's not like that at college. It is completely different. And I think they kind of parents, because it's been the way it is, I've got school transport, they'll be at college, they're responsible. But they're not.
I think we could probably now tie in that mental capacity piece. And
yeah, please do.
So that law around mental capacity and deprivation of liberties, often called DOLS, comes in at 16, okay? And one key thing that we often deal with, and I've done post 16 for an LA, and I've worked in several alternative provisions and colleges as well is there's what's happening with the communication book? Have they got a communication book? And that back and forth from the setting, or we don't seem to hear from the setting that much. I mean, like, they're post 16, mental capacity comes in at 16. The first key parameter and law of that mental capacity is you have to assume capacity. If not, you facilitate it. If not, you do best interest, which is entirely based on everything you know about that young person. So no, there aren't reams of communication. It's almost like no news is good news. Obviously, there'll be a parents' evening, whether that's an AP or GFE or a specialist FE setting. In life learning provisions, those discrete learning provisions, there are circumstances and quite individual where there are communication books, but you're probably looking at entry 1 and pre-entry there. Obviously, lines of communication are always open, but for parents, parent carers, uncles, aunties, brothers, sisters, that young person that you care for is entering a slightly different realm. Let's talk about a mainstream setting, okay? Because you've got all these schools in a local authority, multiple, we're talking double figures. You've got generally one FE setting. So they go from a setting with, and let's suggest it's a village, that might have 100 students in it. If they're in a big town, that might have 1,500. And they might struggle with sensory things. It's quite big, it's quite busy during lesson to lesson times when you're navigating the corridors or the dining hall. You're now coming into a college where my SEN register this year, Dale, is over 2,000. I've got 300 EHCPs. I'm going to colloquialise this. It's very, very different, and that's massive. And those national statistics say, if we think about SENDAN plans, is 1 in 5. Well, just under, isn't it? It's 19.5%. I'm about 1 in 3 for my college group. And you'll see adults milling around because we've got adult courses. You'll see ESOL. So it's really diverse, but it is very different. It's very different. Provision itself changes a bit as well because we've got a massive responsibility. Obviously, the PFA stuff, the preparing for adulthood stuff, comes in at year 9. But we are quite often the last leg of the relay that education is in setting students up for work. So there's a responsibility and a duty in vocational colleges and at alternative provisions to set that student up for employment and the reality of employment. And at times, that is the reality of employment is, and I say this as someone with a mental health neurodiversity, sometimes that work placement might not be so understanding. And we're not saying we have to be conformist. Lord knows, as a head of inclusion and a head of additional learning support, it's my role to be, someone articulated this to me and I loved it, a conscientious agitator. I have to, in my place, say, well, that's not going to work for my students, is it? And when Dale, we were talking earlier, when we read white papers and green papers, we need to look, how is that going to work for our field? And we'll comment and say, well, I don't see this piece. I don't see this piece. We're not doing it to be the mosquito within the net. We're doing it because the best interest of our young people. And that's why we do it. So sometimes you'll pull a student up and say, look, you can't tell the tutor to go away in no uncertain terms, or you've not been in, your attendance is at 37%. That we understand the ebbs and the piece and the avoidance. And it's really obvious sometimes, because sometimes I'll go to a car and a student's physically shaking. And I'm like, you know what, you made it this far. Go home for today, because that's a huge success.
But the big thing here in all of this is that's at college, sixth form, whatever, that is a relationship between you and that other adult. Because at 16, it's not only that, it's things like the medical records. They do not have to share it with parents. Lots of things change at 16. I think parents, it can come as a bit of a shock when they ask your child in front of you, do you want your parents to know this? Or you're literally going, but I'm the parent. And it's
even
that
the
first...
reviews, even like statutory EHCP reviews, who do you want to invite?
Yeah.
99 times out of 100. And in fact, like I said, I've done nearly 4,000 reviews. I can remember on one hand the amount of learners or young people that have said, you know what, I don't really want my family there. And I'll be like, oh, I'm a bit worried how this is going to go down.
But if a student has told a member of staff to go away in no uncertain terms, as your phrase was, you don't tell the parents. If their attendance is 37%, you don't tell the parents. That's a conversation between you and the student.
And a young person, until it gets to a stage where we're thinking, right, the stage before a withdrawal, we then start to think, pull parents in. And obviously, there's definite communication. I'm open season for students, so my office hasn't even got a door. Students come in and they'll say, oh, our tutor's done this, that, and the other. And I'm not stupid. I've taught myself. So I'm like, so what did you do? But often, and quite often, of course, but quite often, it's been a delivery tact. And I'm like, you know what? Let's use Jimmy. You know what, Jimmy? Oh, I don't think I've got one Jimmy. But you know what, Jimmy? Okay, I'm going to walk into that class and observe that class. And this might be someone I'm out with the Christmas drinks with, or the summertime drinks at the end of term. But it's that conscientious agitator term that I've stolen from someone I was speaking to yesterday. That's my job. And I'm going to say it's a bit crass. People from where I work will probably lobby me when this gets released, but I don't really care if that I walk into a lesson and after I give feedback, because actually my job is, and my responsibility is to the young person. But exactly like you say, the young person, because they're post 16. I don't have to, and I know this isn't going to settle well, but you've basically synopsized. I don't have to tell a parent if I've pulled a student aside and said, come on, mate, what are you playing at?
But it's the truth. Is when my eldest went to college for the first time, someone created a college parents group on Facebook. And I was like, why? I'll join it just in case there's something. And like 3 weeks in, you got parents going, I haven't had a newsletter. I haven't had this. And then it's like, and someone went, apparently it was parents' evening last week. Why wasn't I invited? And it's like, and it says, again, college, I think my daughter's college is 2,000 students per year. You're not going to have a parents' evening with 2,000 sets of parents. The parents' evening is only for students where the college has concerns.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's such, and the parents were going, but that's it. Just, I want to know. I have a right. No, you don't.
You don't now.
You
and
don't.
That isn't down to you, Dale, or me as Chris. That's central government. When did MCA come out? 2005. I think it was 2005.
I do agree with it, because they're going to college on their own. They're making their own decisions. They need to learn about, you know what, I don't feel well today. Am I going to go to college? Should I go to college? If I get all the way, I'm actually going to learn. And they need to make those decisions.
Because we do. You know, sometimes you're at work and you're feeling a bit groggy, but you're well enough to be at work.
Yeah.
And you know, other times you'll go in and everyone you work with will be, look, you look rough. You need to go home. And then there's other times when you're like, I can't even the night before, you know, you already know, look, I'm not going to be at work tomorrow. I feel awful. Students have to make that decision. And bear in mind, in FE, we've got a car park for students. So students have the responsibility to drive.
Yeah.
A lot of the students are over 18, so they might be going out and about, and then on a Monday they'll come in and talk about, oh, we went to this place, this place, this place. And my kids aren't that old enough yet. I'll cross that bridge when it comes to it, but hopefully I've got a bit of understanding, and I don't treat my kids' schools. I treat them as a parent who understands, because I work in education. But it's that piece. They are of age. We are getting them ready for work. It should be the young person. And bearing in mind, we are talking generalizations. Obviously, for our life learning provision, I would expect parents to be letting us know, look, they've got a bad stomach or they are down with a cold. But if someone's in our sixth form, someone's in, say, an access course, to get your mum ringing that you're unwell, let's ramp this up a little bit.
So at my daughter's college, it was the parents who had to basically write in that my child might be absences. I had a page on the website where I would fill them in, but I said to my daughter, I'm never going to decide. You just tell me. Because she might have a lesson in the afternoon and not going in the mornings. When I've left, she's still in bed. Then she'll message me going, I'm feeling really ill. I can't go in today. Cool. Train strikes. Cool. There are so many reasons why she could not get in, but I was going to let her. That decision was hers. I'd let her maybe get into some trouble and kind of so she knows she's made a mistake before I step in. Because that's the whole point of being an adult. It's kind of helping them learn this is your responsibility. You've got to kind of have some rope to hang yourself with. But she made her decisions. She got her A levels. She got to where she wanted to go. Great.
And that's not, every mistake's a learning opportunity.
Yes.
And we've all lived it. I know the younger generation gets surprised when you're like, oh, I did that too. You're like, what? When the dinosaurs were around, you're like, oh, well done, mate. We've all, there's nothing new under the sun, is there?
No.
It's a terminology and idiom. But we've all done the same things. It's just that when we were kids, we thought we were the first to do it. That's a really important piece, because what we're trying to do in all these post-16 settings is prepare students for what's next. And what's next is a heightened level of academia with a far reduced level of provision if you're thinking about going to uni, or work, where supporting work, that access to work piece, you're not getting someone sat next to you.
No.
You'll get technology to support you. There'll be physical accessibility provision put in place, but that's reasonable adjustment from the work setting. So that comes into place as well, Dale, where when we're looking at students that might be in a year where we're thinking, right, your next move is either higher education or work, that we're pulling back a little bit. And then it's like, oh, well, where's my support? And it's like, well, we've got a duty of care to set students up for what's next.
Yes.
And that's even before we talk about preparing for adulthood. Sen Code of Practice talks about and I said about this earlier for feeder settings, but even for colleges, to set students up for next steps. And for us, is that final year in an FE setting or a post-16 setting, because I'm also the head of SEND in an AP for within Milton Keynes, and we do the same in the AP. It's just on a far smaller scale, far smaller numbers. It works amazingly well because it can be far more bespoke at the AP. The AP is led off a charitable food bank premise, so you can see how maths is embedded there with stock takes, sharing the food out to communities of need and areas of deprivation. English, obviously, quite similar. but then they do like vocational placement in the factories, engagement with people that are coming through. It's all preparation for what's next. And what is next is the big wide world where
they're independent.
some people don't really give two hoots about an acronym that I have. I just have to. I have to do my job.
Yeah.
Ultimately, whether I've got an acronym or not, or my kids and my wife are struggling to be eating a dinner.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds.
But that's an adult. That ultimately is, you have to do what you have to do as an adult, and you can't do that with your parents sitting behind you. That is a step you have to take. And as parents, you're always looking after and trying to worry, and you worry for your kids. And I think if they have EHCPs, that is probably completely multiplied by 1,000, that you're kind of looking after. They protect them, they can't, I need to. And you're just trying to protect them because education has failed them previously. It's why they've got their EHCP and all these sorts of things. So taking that step back can be really, really hard, and letting them be independent. And I think being at college is that great bit of, they're on a lead, an extendable lead. It goes quite far, but there is still a lead. And it means that the parents kind of have to let go. And it's an opportunity for them to see actually how their child is doing being supported by someone else, and actually how much their child can do independently, and also the decisions their child makes for themselves. Now, earlier in a lot of the podcasts, we've kind of talked about the path of kind of school to college onto higher education. But right at the beginning, you talked about, with the EHCPs, it's the E is the important part. There has to be an educational need. So it might be you're going through to get those A levels to move on, and then the kind of the EHCP ceases because you're going to get other support in different ways. But then you've got a scale beneath that where, as you said, if they're not making progress, and there's a whole thing of, there are going to be children who might get level 2 functional skills, but realistically aren't going to get A levels. What kind of happens in those sorts of situations?
This is where we face the ambiguity of some legislation and the localized interpretation of that ambiguity. Obviously, within our world, we often talk about a postcode lottery, and LA's. Now, I'm yet to meet someone who works for an LA, having done myself work for an LA. I'm yet to meet someone who works in an LA who I've thought, you're horrible. You're definitely not here for the children. You are so evidently just thinking about nothing but the children. Not once have I met anyone like that. But different LAs work differently, which is, I can imagine, none of my two have an EHCP. My eldest is within the SEND register, but I can imagine that's incredibly frustrating for parents, because there might be a similar student representative of a different LA, and that LA will say, okay, we'll fund them for another year on the same level. So let's say like you say, they've passed FS level 2, and they are doing, let's hypothetically say, level 2 motor vehicle. This one, the same. But that LA will say no, because this sounds really crass, but it's a term I'm familiar with. You've met your academic ceiling, and you've got the provision documented in your plan. You're already 1-to-1, which is very tight provision of support. You've got the rest of the universal provision within the setting. We can't really go beyond that, can we? And if we were to put you up to a level 3, we would be setting you up to fail. No one wants to do that, because the student's going to have an awful experience and they're going to feel some sort of way about a bad educational journey. Lord knows education isn't set up for our students anyway. That's a really hard discussion.
Yes.
And it always feels unkind, but I always use a silly analogy, Dale. Like, I'm never going to be Stephen Hawking or Stephen Fry, but I know where my pitch is. I could use letters behind my name. I choose not to, but we've all got degrees. But that level of eloquence and that level of cognitive ability isn't going to be me. We all get to what we need to do and where we need to be. Like, I think about myself. Some of my degrees have come, in fact, all of them have come when I've been a husband and a dad. I didn't pursue that when I was the age of some of the learners we're talking about. So all roads lead to Rome is probably what I'm suggesting. And education never stops. Every day is a learning day. But that's a very hard discussion. And it's very hard when precedent is set in some case studies. Because you've got central court saying, well, actually, they're making whole person progression, but not academic progression. You need to keep the EHCP open. Awarding bodies and external awarding bodies for curriculum areas often won't take someone on a level 2 course who's got a level 2 qualification, even if that's catering and they want to go into sports. You've got a level 2.
Yeah.
That's not the setting. That's not your AP. That's not your specialist post-16 college. That's not your GFE, your general further education setting, whimsically deciding that Dale Pickles isn't allowed to do another level 2. It's the external awarding body.
Yeah.
Which, again, is really hard. And I can imagine is really hard for parents to take because this is their young person's journey. And as parents, we only want the best for the young person. There's a myriad of things that seem to be cloaked. And I don't know whether I'm coming with quite a conscious bias with the majority of my background from before the SEND reforms are fully implemented, being PFA years and above. So that's at year 9 and above. But I always feel like when it comes to legislation that you don't often read a lot about post-16.
No.
It's almost like the family member that you have to invite to the function, everyone will say hello to, but there's no deep conversations happening with them. Look, we've got to pay lip service to inviting them to the family.
But it's also this, as you're talking about, this whole thing of if you have an academic ceiling, let's use that phrase. Not a nice phrase, as you
I'm
say.
aware it's a crass phrase.
It's not, but it
doesn't
is.
sit well with me, but I'm aware I might have mine.
But again, I don't want to, because again, I don't want to use the term reach potential because you're purely talking in an academic context in a certain way, assessed
Whether
a
we agree
certain
with
way.
that or not, and we've had that discussion earlier.
But that is a conversation which I don't think I've literally, till we had our conversation, this is something I've never heard of. But since then, I've talked to parents who are in this situation, whose child is kind of, they've achieved this, they're not going to get to that next to a level 3. The college has said, well, we don't offer, you've done a kind of all the courses we can actually do with them. There aren't any courses. But at the same time, the parents know that that is where their child feels safe. That's where their child enjoys. And if they don't go to college, there is nothing. And again, if they are making progress, so that academic ceiling could be much lower. So if they're not making progress, it could be even lower, and an EHCP could be removed. And the arguing, oh, they need this from social care, they need that, but you have to go to social care. They are an adult. That is not education's responsibility. That is social care's responsibility. But they know that actually the education fought for it. The education provides it. The education is there because they're in the setting making sure. And they just get lost in this system. And it's when we had this conversation, it was a really horrible conversation. It's a really horrible truth to learn.
And that's probably why I crassly articulate it as being the sharp end of the sword. Because for a parent, I understand that scenario you've proposed is the cliff edge. And there are loads of times that in-house I've got a SEND panel every week. I don't need to advertise that to parents. Parents might say, so how do you keep an eye on it? Every week? I'm monitoring, and alerts will come in if it's about one of my 2,000 students. My TAs will feedback, my heads of the TAs, my heads of REAA, everyone will feedback to me in that meeting weekly. So I'll know if essentially on the day, if Bob has just been sick in class, like physically sick in class, I'll know like that. If Bob has, we'll use the same example, told someone in no uncertain terms something about themselves, I will know on that day. But we will discuss it in a panel. But I'm fully aware that that's a massive cliff edge for parents. But we would have been discussing that in-house. And I know other settings, post-16 APs, specialist settings, other GFE settings will be doing the same regularly, discussing and like pulling their hair out because it's not a nice conversation.
It's a conversation no one's prepared them for. So they thought that sword was longer.
Of
They
course.
thought, I've got a way to go yet. And
I don't want
suddenly
to
you're
do
at the
that.
edge.
I don't want to do, and it's what I mean is I don't want to do that. I know I have to be the bearer of bad news, but that's a human.
But you're the
And it's
messenger.
a human I'm familiar with now because 2000's a lot, okay, but definitely 300 with EHCPs I know. And I would say there's up to about 1,000 that I can pass in the corridor and I will know they're mine, okay. We're loco parentis, and I take that responsibility quite heavily because when someone suggests I might be failing a student, that really, really impacts me. So those discussions, it goes beyond an empathy. I can imagine what that's like for a parent. I can imagine a parent not being told in year 11, they're only in college for like 12. If you pass maths and English, you're only in college for 12 hours, maybe 14, 16 hours. You've got 3 days of what? PlayStation, whatever the latest console is. Parents aren't often told that. And I'm like, I don't want to, because that's a massive life change. The same at the precipice of the cliff when they might be reaching an academic ceiling. For 11 years, Dale, I'm not too sure how to articulate that in a more palatable manner.
There isn't, because basically you're saying your child has got to the best of what they're going to do, and that's that. No one ever. It's like taking your cat to a vet and they're going, yeah, the best thing to do is, it's not the same, but it's that sort of where you thought your child was going to go, what you thought your child was going to achieve, and that nice, safe place which keeps them happy and keeps them safe is now being taken away. But it wasn't a decision by those at the college, especially with the EHCPs. It's funded.
Of course, and the absolute responsibilities around plans is the LA's. So a student will have a plan, and Friday, I'm working from home today, so Friday's my consultation, my legal day. I've got about another 8 to do already for September 26. And last year, Dale, I did over 500 consultations.
Wow.
So that's a size. And that was just for our mainstream curriculum. There was about 200 for our life learning provision. So that's huge. That gives parents an idea because we often get told, oh, they're in such and such a school. Well, actually, they're in that isolated provision where they might not ever leave that provision and mill around with 1,500 students. They're there. So are you in that school? Because that is a massive jump to come into a setting with 7,000 students on a Wednesday and Thursday. They're busy days. They're day 2 or day 3, Wednesday and Thursday. So we've pretty much got everyone in. That's chalk and cheese.
Yes.
And then when I see a consultation, I tell the council what we can and can't do. because there are lots of things that don't transfer. You see, like with 16, let's say 16 hours, or 21, let's say 21 or 22, because they're doing maths and English hypothetically. Remember back in the day, if you were doing about half of it, you'd probably get a statement or an EHCP. In FE, it's ratios. Anything less than 1 to 2, you're unlikely to be a higher needs funded or a top up element. And that then, and ideally we are developing independence, okay? What families need to know is that I'm never pulling provision without evidence. I'm never saying, you know what, Dale, off you go, off you trot, chucking you in at the deep end without giving a hoot. If we can evidence and I can see what's happening in class and you're doing fine, I will pull back that scaffolding. For some parents, that's like, well, the plan says X, Y, Z, 500 TAs to 1. I'm like, we're not seeing that need. Quite often, that whole masking piece, students come into college and they are amazing students, but they go home and it's that fizzy bottle analogy that we all know in the world. And parents are like, oh, this is happening, this is happening. Again, that's another tricky discussion, because what we'll do is, if it's an existing student, we'll support and we'll put in, you don't need to mask, okay? You're allowed timeouts, and you are allowed timeouts. You're allowed to go to the toilet without putting your hand up. You're a young adult. It's like we would in the workplace. You don't even tell anyone. You're just going for a little walk, stretch your legs. It becomes a lot trickier. Certainly when it comes to parents asking me for needs assessment referrals and supporting that, I will definitely then put that in the needs assessment referral. So we might not, as a setting, have a lot of evidence, because to us, that young person, that young adult is choosing to mask. I don't ever want students to mask and fizzy bottle. And I'm quite clear to some of my students, you don't have to do that. If you're struggling, please just be open, because I've got teams, I've got specific rooms that you can de-escalate in that are staffed to help you ground yourself and help you come down from your feeling that a tutor might have not printed something out for you on a specific colour, might have not shared resources before the lesson. You tell me that, I'll deal with that. But you are allowed to get annoyed at that and ticked off. Come to this room and calm down. And I don't mean calm down rudely. I mean, and let yourself just chill for a bit. Get out of that environment until you're ready to re-enter, like we would at work if you just had a pretty...
And that's the thing, it is, again, preparing for adulthood. How are you going to survive at your next stage? You can't be at work for however many years and every day fizz up at home.
It's one story.
Got to learn how to manage that. So, question that I think I know the answer to, sadly, but I've got to ask, is you talked about maybe someone who's done a level 2 qualification. Let's say they've got their English and maths, and their interest is car mechanics, but they have a 1-to-1. Are they likely, is the local authority likely to fund that car mechanics course because they have an interest in cars, but they have a 1-to-1? Because in my head, one of the things the local authority might be going is, there's no point in doing car mechanics if they need a 1-to-1, because they're never going to be able to get a job doing the car mechanics if they have a 1-to-1. So does that, again, that level of support kind of start deciding how much funding there will be kind of to kind of diversify and do other courses?
So it's important to, I will answer that. It's important to say that, at every other key stage, that basic funding that everyone gets don't really exist in college, okay? So you're now looking at top up, that element 3, that H&F. So generally, Dale, councils will fund. And I can think historically, but again, you're at the whim of that council. And having sat in a council, I have to be conscious of how I'm going to articulate this. Those funding panels, at times can be quite a slog. The people within that panel are having a lovely day. Things will sail through. If they've just had a rather unpleasant phone call, they might be a bit finicky and picky. We're quite blessed with strong relationships with the LA, and that's something I really work on in this setting and my last setting. Regular meetings with the LA, regular and beyond those almost daily lines of communication. So there's a professional relationship where they know that actually I'm not thinking about the money because I'm not going on holiday to Barbados or all the animals in the Serengeti because I'm creaming it off to myself. We do get students with one-to-ones doing catering. We do get students in motor vehicle with one-to-one or one-to-two. Bear in mind, we need to develop independence. So we will incrementally reduce ratios of support. That does happen. We do have to, though, think, are you ever going to be, hypothetically, a Sparky? Are you ever going to get to work with young people if you're passing the level 1? Because generally, you need to pass a level 2, and then you'll be doing work placement, and people will take you on. Like you can babysit and stuff like that. And I'm aware a lot of this discussion is quite sensitive, and I'm being quite hesitant.
It's a really hard conversation because
I'm being quite conscious, and you can see me stalling and quickly trying to figure out how I'm going to articulate it because it's not a nice conversation.
no, that's kind of I want to. It's not the fact you're going to give me a lovely, clear answer. It's literally the fact that you're struggling to word it in a way, and also it's not, as you said, every local authority is different. So you can't even give me a concrete answer. But it is one of those things where parents are going, okay, they've got that course. Okay, he likes cars. Let's do that course. No, the local authority will be thinking, is there a chance they're going to work in that industry? Are they going to be able to? Will we be able to kind of get that independence at level? They can get a job in a garage. If they'll always need that support, then we're not doing that course to get them a job. We're doing that course to keep them in somewhere where the parents want them to be. And I'm wording it in quite a blunt way because I want to destroy or say anything horrible, but this is the conversations parents are maybe going to turn up to a meeting and have this said to them with no warning.
And that is really, really hard. And you can already tell, and you alluded, like it doesn't sit with me well.
No.
You will read in my post that I'm quite definitely the conscientious agitator of legislation pieces that are coming out. And I would definitely, and I would quite confidently say I'm person-centered. If someone challenged me on that, I would be quite hurt. But these are discussions that are being had post 16, and they're tricky discussions. And they're discussions that in any other key stage, parents aren't being informed this might happen in the future. Okay, this might happen. And forewarned is forearmed and all that. And then we come in, someone comes to us and we're like, well, and we're talking worst case scenarios. Look, there are huge successes. EHCPs are still abided by. Provision is still in place. I talk about the college group that I work for. We've got a really strong ordinarily available provision. And I would go as far as saying that for the students on the SEND register, it's markedly different and a lot stronger than some of the places they might have come to. I work very closely to the feeder settings, and they're all really nice people. We're doing quite well. Our most recent Ofsted was within 2 calendar years, and we got an outstanding for the SEND and the H&F piece. I would have been really annoyed if we didn't, because I definitely believe we are. I definitely believe we are. I wouldn't lie for the sake of lying and to pat myself on the back, because that's really not who I am. I'm probably more imposter syndrome than Dunning-Kruger, where we spoke about this when we spoke to you, but how have I been caught? And I've just tried to rob a bank without a mask on, is what we were talking about. It's hard. And I'm fully aware that as a parent, it's a whole new thing, because someone could be in year 11 getting a whole heap of support. I get a consultation and I look at it, and if the plan's not written well, I might assume, you know what, they can be unfunded. They can just I'll meet with them. I'll tell them, here's our ordinarily available offer. We'll do a learner profile. I'll give you a card to access our de-escalation rooms. I'll set you up with wellbeing. But from what I'm reading in the plan, I think you're fine with that, because the plan isn't specific. I see loads of plans in a consultation that says by the end of key stage 4. Is that plan even going to be alive when you come into key stage 5 post 16? I don't know that, because realistically, if the objective is finished, a plan could be ceased. It's hard. So I have done loads of work in the last few academic years creating relationships with feeders. This is essentially the responsibility of all the LAs I work with, bearing in mind in post-16 settings you work with multiple LAs to discuss that piece. I'll come to your reviews if it's a student you want me to come to, or at least someone in my team will. We do transition events. Obviously, like any post-16 setting or any school, there's open events. But we'll do things in half terms and term breaks where we'll get parents in with the young person, bear in mind the age of the young person. Some might be 16, some might be 15. So we're skirting around that MCA coming in. And we'll do tours. We'll talk about the differences. I've had all the feeders in to talk about the differences and the importance of that plan being up to date, because a real difficult thing is, in EHCPs where it says Chris bit someone because they stole his Tonka toy, that might have happened in nursery. But if it's not, and it likely did, given the context of what I've just said, but if that's not contextualized and said in nursery or when Chris was 4, I'm thinking, oh, did that happen last week?
Yep.
And I can say no. I don't want to say no, but any setting, any phase transfer and any consultation phase can say no if it's incompatible with the efficient education of others. Biting others would come under that. Disruption would, aggression would, verbalizations that are coarse would. And I'm not talking Tourette's there. I'm talking you're just telling someone things that aren't very nice about themselves. Equally, I can say no, and any setting can at any age on the consultation periods if they can't meet need. And quite often, there are an ever increasing amount of plans that we can't meet need. And I'm going to drop a cliche now. Certainly, COVID has done a number on students. And I'm talking the whole person, the holistic, and probably more in relation to the SEMH piece, the anxiety. And we certainly see that now with avoidance and non-attendance. And I'm really inferring the fact that you can't. I'm not saying you won't. I'm saying you can't. And it's really clear sometimes when students are struggling and your heart goes out. It's that example I gave earlier where I'll go to visit someone at the car. Their parent carers brought them in and they are shaking. I don't ever want to see that in a student. But if it's not going to work, we are under the responsibility of the parameters that the external awarding bodies put on us. You need to be in college. You need to have a certain amount of attendance for us to be able to accredit your work as yours and not just chat GPTs because we don't see you. Obviously, we make reasonable adjustments for things like EDS and POTS and stuff like that, but we still need to see you to make sure this is your work. And that's really hard as well. But that's never Chris's decision. It's peer, and I'm going to just colloque, it's AQA, it's Pearson's, it's whoever we're getting that course in. But we're facing that and we're having to deliver that. It's very different across the whole board there.
And one of the things I'm just going to
provision still exists.
I'm just going
that is in place.
Just going to touch. You talked about your pupils, your person centered, and you very much are in all my conversations with you. You very much are. And you talked about how kind of the 300 odd EHCP students, you know them. Yeah. And I bet when you kind of get to August each year and you get that results, or when you get those results and you know that actually by that student getting that qualification, that means, yes, they're going to go on to do what they want. And that's going to be a really great feeling. But I bet you also get this feeling that you kind of know that actually for that child or that young person getting that qualification kind of means the end of their journey with you. And actually that future isn't bright.
Yeah. So I've got a piece of CPD that I do in-house, and I like to articulate it as like stoking the fire. So I lead on the harsh facts of systemic ableism, some of the facts we spoke about before we were recording, about the disparities in the amount of people in work. I look back and think during COVID, people with cognitive difficulties, no one was allowed to support them in appointments. They weren't allowed advocates. And this is out there, this is publicised. A lot of them were given DNRs. For me, that's disgusting. That's disgusting. You know, you can still have an abortion at 40 weeks only if in utero is Down syndrome. That's disgusting. 40 weeks is full term. People are born before then and fully healthy. It starts with those disgusting things in society that we're trying to challenge. But then it goes on to address, and that's a reality. And it's not a nice reality, but all of us are in a position to try and challenge that and make a difference in the little area that we do. And I'm certainly trying to. But it then goes on to stoke the fire. Well, look at this achievement. Look at this achievement. Look at this achievement. I've got a video on it of, remember that piano program on Channel 4 and that young girl who was autistic, blind, playing the piano? I've got a video of a young American girl and she's singing an Adele song, but she's reading a Braille music sheet to sing it. And that's beautiful. That's quite touching, actually. Video of a lad with CP doing the Atlas Stones on the World's Strongest Man. I've got a video of an Olympian running 100 meters in less than 11 seconds. Dale, it would take me 11 days. Usain Bolt would be back in Jamaica. I'd still be running it blind. 11 seconds. That's something else.
There's a lot of trust there.
They are so fluid and they are one person. It's amazing to watch. I'm like, you know what? If we reduce our unconscious bias, here's what can be achieved. Here's what can be achieved. And my little girl loves watching Strictly. Look at Ellie on Strictly.
Yes.
And this will be out of date when this gets released. But things like that are really important. And I use that to stoke the fire for tutors. And I'll deliver that non-specific to one tutor, but to the whole college, to learning areas. And it's do not put ceilings on people, because you never know ceilings. You never know what someone can achieve when it's their field, okay, and their area of interest. But I'm here to be person-centered. And what really stood out for me when it comes to results is every year there'll be students that will want someone in my team to open their envelope. every day, a student will come to someone in my team. It might be me. There are students that will come to me, but there are students that will go to other members of my team for support. Now, what we do is hard to create quantitative data for. So we don't really fit the bill of these in-house, nor would I suggest anyone in my role. What that inclusion piece and that SEM piece doesn't really fit the bill, because how can you evidence things are working? Attendance might allude to it, results might allude to it, but you're missing the richness of what's happening. That's the richness of what's happening. But that doesn't resonate with Ofsted. That doesn't resonate with quality teams, because it's got to be quantifiable.
Yeah.
That's qualitative. When I see someone go to someone in my team and say, you open my GCSE results, and then them appropriately, but bear in mind this is a moment of elation, like embrace a member of my team because they've passed, that's all I need to see. And I'm like, I become a bit soppy, my heart's warm. Equally, when I know, and this has happened to me in the past, a student I've got a really strong relationship is finishing their education journey, and we might have a leavers thing or something like that, and parents are there and they're saying goodbye to me, I get quite choked up. I can think of someone I'm thinking of is in my last set, and I actually got quite choked up, and I had to I couldn't talk. My Adam's apple was the size of a rugby ball, and I was like, you're gonna need to go. Because we're loco parentis, like at any age, we do care. It's just that this key stage, at this age, whether you're in a specialist post-16, a general mainstream further education setting, an AP, the discrete learning provision within a general level, unfortunately, we adhere to a lot of external stuff and those parameters in place. And we then are often, and I'll use the same metaphor, the bearers of bad news and at the sharp end of the sword, where we are looking at placements, we are looking at progression, we are looking at attendance, we are looking at, I can't be putting someone onto a level 2 course if they can't function, because that's not fair on them. They're going to really, really struggle. And I don't want someone to feel really negative about themselves because they're finding something almost too hard.
But it's one of those, I think it's one of the things by them staying with you, it's a safe place. It's known what will happen each day. If that young person is not with you, can they look after themselves at home? Does an adult need to be at home? Does that adult need to give up their work?
And that's that edge of the cliff.
Is there the opportunity for the social care to get involved? That is a really horrible. I don't know anything about it. It's one of those areas where I know nothing about it. It's not advertised as these are the options. Pick 1 to 5. It's not there. It is expected that somebody stays at home and is with it. That's kind of the bottom line. And while they're with you, that doesn't have to happen. It's a really hard, really, really hard and horrible decisions. And while they're with you, they do not have to face that decision.
Of course. And we often find when we're doing discussions or we're doing a review and it is at that stage, like all other stages of education, that joint work hasn't happened. Okay. Long before that review takes place, we will have informed the council, look, we think this might be it for a student. By hook or by crook, whatever reason, there could be a myriad of reasons for that. And quite often, because of mental capacity, students will say, I don't want to be in college anymore. And we're like, well, okay, parents can kick up a fuss. If we do a dynamic mental capacity assessment and they do the pros and the cons and they're like, well, it is what it is, we've got to go by it. Mental capacity supports unwise decisions. It's really hard because a review is just education, we find quite a lot. We can flag to some LAs, we really feel you need to be at this one. We are quite often then delivering the IAG that, to my knowledge, and I would suggest I'm quite decent with legislation, is the LA's responsibility. And again, I go back to that statement that anyone I've either worked with when I worked in an LA or in the past few settings I've worked in that have been education side of the fence, but obviously tight relationships with the LAs, no one is ever going out of their way to create a hurdle for a student. They're all really, really nice people, but those parameters are set, be that in the code of practice does say that learning has to be progressive. I probably will remember what section that is the minute we hang up. But it definitely does talk about education having to be progressive. So that's then where we allude to the poorly articulated academic ceiling. However, I know there are legal case studies where holistic development takes precedent over academic development. It's very unique to each case, it's very unique to each LA, and it becomes really painful because we are invested in the young person. We might have had that young person as long as the secondary have had that young person, and we know that young person, and that young person will come to us and say, oh, don't tell my auntie this or my nan or my mum or dad. And we have to not. Obviously, I'm not talking about safeguarding concerns. I'm talking, we have to not, because they're just, oh, I did this, and we're like, okay, we don't want to. You create that professional relationship with a young person, and at this age, they're nearer the same level, and we talk to students almost like they're adults, unless they start acting like a kid, and then we will address them, and then they'll think, oh, you're talking to me like I'm a kid. But that we quite often get students come in and just want to chat about what they've done or chat about what's going on in their life, like have a conversation, talk about EastEnders, whatever, Stranger Things about stuff. Honestly, just have conversations because they see us, because we're all adults now. And that relationship is very different to a secondary. But that's a really lovely part of this age group. But then to flip that coin, someone is then leaving. And you've built a relationship with them almost like a work colleague, whilst you do have loco parentis, because they do come to you. And you're working there, and there are times I don't feel like big, wider education metrics fit our students, and we had this discussion. But you have to adhere to them. We were talking about the quality assurance of a setting earlier. We have to adhere to it. Whereas what we do is qualitative, not quantitative. How are we going to evidence inclusion and the impact of inclusion? Well, it's got to be measured. And we want school to know if our kids are going to an amazing school or a really, really terrible one. But it's quite hard to quantify the impact. You see the impact. Students feel the impact. It's really hard to say goodbye to students knowing all the key data about society being quite ableist at times. And that I'll forever be, until I win the lottery, I'll forever be fighting against things like that and being a conscientious agitator, but I can't impact that. And it's really tricky for parent carers that at times this is the end of the education journey. And I fully get that. It's hard.
Very hard.
For parent carers.
And I'm going to end it there. Because I think we haven't given the nice, precise answers that everyone always loves. But it is a really horrible, complicated area. It's an area that creeps up on parents and it just surprises them when they have thought they had much more time in the education system. And it's something everyone needs to kind of be aware of, where their child is, where they're likely, what's the options. So they're actually thinking of what are other options rather than I'm here for years, we've got another couple of years, and then suddenly finding out, oh no, end of this year, it'll be over. It's really not good. Chris has given me loads of links to articles he's written, lots of guidance and legislation, lots of things he's mentioned, also his LinkedIn profile. So you can follow him and connect with him. And you'll find the show notes, as always, on the Zencast website or wherever you listen to this podcast. And thank you for listening to the show. If you haven't subscribed already, click on that subscribe button. And don't forget to follow us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky. I think that's all of them. And you can send us a message through those as well. And if you're looking for a simple, secure way to capture and share evidence of learning, or a way to capture pupil voice, a way to celebrate and share achievements, or a simple, safe way to communicate with parents, you need to have a look at Eversense. Eversense is our evidence system that does so much more to help boost parental engagement. To find out more about Eversense, visit the B Squared website, where you'll also find about our other products, our CPD, where you can read our blog, watch our webinars, and you'll also find a link to the website. So you'll find a link to the website and to book a meeting with me so I can take you through Eversense or answer any questions you have about B Squared in the show notes. But thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Zencast. It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.